brothers and sisters. I'm very, very pleased to be here. I think that by this time we've all got a little bit settled in. We've all been sick once or twice, I think, already. We know what shopping is like, and it's just been a wonderful trip. There's been a few frustrations, but there's always a few minor glitches, but basically this has been a fantastic trip. This is my 6th trip to Egypt, and I feel as if I came here 100 times, I would still be finding new things. I was really wore out the other night. I feel somewhat more rested. I'm still a little bit nervous because it's such a distinguished audience that has assembled here. And I'm always a little bit nervous, but I'm also excited, and I always feel it's a privilege and a pleasure and an honor to talk about the history of African people, because we have a history that is second to none. Now, there's one thing I didn't do the other night, and again, it's just fatigue and nervousness and all the travel and everything. It's something I always do, and a lot of us in what we call the African-centered movement. Can everybody hear me pretty well back there? Yes. In the African-centered movement, certainly in the Western Hemisphere, what we do is when we have a program, the first thing we do is we acknowledge the elders. Right? So I'm 46. That's anybody 46 and a half years old or more. Do we have anybody older than 46 in the room? I would like to. I know everybody didn't raise their hand. So I would like to acknowledge you and request your permission to speak and begin the lecture. Do I have your permission? It's wonderful to be here again. I want to thank Sister Amira and my esteemed brother Jamal. I can't say enough good things about Jamal. Now, he's a giant to me. Now, he's big anyway. But he's big in every way. He's just a wonderful brother. And because of him and because of Carl in particular, that's how most of you know me. But there's another brother that I really didn't get a chance to acknowledge the other day, and that is Brother Raymond Murray. Is Raymond here? Raymond is a great brother in and of himself, and it's Raymond who actually recommended me to be the lecturer to Sister Amira. So I dedicate this presentation to Brother Raymond. I hope he's not sick. And to his Nubian queen, Sister Betty. Okay? Brenda. Oh, boy. You saw him get up there in that perfume factory yesterday. See, I'd have been up there quicker than that. And then we'd have had a long discussion after that. But anyway, let me talk about Egypt. But before I do, I also want to acknowledge our brilliant tour guides. They're excellent. Give them one more round of applause. I've learned a lot from them. And last night I had the privilege of listening to Dr. Hassan at the Temple of Konumbo. And the brother was just smoking. Absolutely. I mean, the temple is awesome by itself. You can just walk there and see it and be inspired. But he gave a scintillating presentation. And I remember he was talking, and he was talking rather loud. And I think sometimes one of the reasons that Dr. Hassan and I seem to bump heads is because we're so much alike. I think that's the problem right there, okay? That's good too. And he was talking about something, and he was very excited, and he was very passionate. And one of the members of the other tours, I think they were a German tour, I believe, you know, shh, shh. And he said, you, shh. She said, you're talking so loud. He said, I meant to talk loud. I meant for you to hear me. You know, one of the downsides of this trip is the negative attitudes of a lot of the European tourists. Just as rude and nasty. And I respect you all for not sinking to that level. Because I'll be thinking about pushing people into the Nile River. But don't let these people push your buttons. And don't let them spoil the trip. They act as though they resent you being here. They see you sometimes and seem to recoil in horror. Not all of them, but too many of them. So don't let that spoil your trip. Now we're in Egypt, and we're sailing down the Nile. We're sailing north, and we're moving into Upper Egypt. We're moving into Luxor. And so I'm going to spend some time talking about that. And people have been impressed with Egypt for thousands of years. For example, there is a Greek named Herodotus. You heard of Herodotus? Yes. You should be familiar with his work. It's very important. He wrote a book called The Histories. In fact, he's sometimes called the father of history. We know better than that because the first time we find him, he is in Africa studying history. So we'll call him the Greek father of history. But he has an excellent book. You can still find it. It's been reprinted many, many, many times. And he has a section on Egypt. And this is what he says, and this is how I'd like to begin the presentation. and then we can turn the lights down. This is going to be a show and tell presentation. I like to show and tell. And then I'll do part 2 this evening, and Brother Frank, our excellent spoken word man, will begin that program with a few spoken words. Very powerful. Give this brother a round of applause. And then I'll do that presentation, and then after dinner, after you've had a chance to digest your food, for those of you who are interested, we can gather somewhere, maybe up top if it's not too cold, or in here. And we can just hold court, and we can talk to y'all get sleepy. Anyway, and one more time for Sister Amira. She has shown so much patience. Okay? I'd have been cussing and fussing. Believe me. Okay? All right, now this is what the writer said. And just thank you all for being here. Give yourselves a round of applause, all right? And then let's go. Now that we've clapped and clapped and clapped, let me say this. This is nice. And this is from my website. He says, concerning Egypt, I will now speak at length, because nowhere are there so many marvelous things, nor in the whole world beside are there to be seen so many things of unspeakable greatness. That's Egypt. It's impressive right now. But imagine what it was like back in the day. 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, when it was lush and green and well attended and painted. You can imagine the excitement that it generated. Egypt is a special place. No place in the world like Egypt. I've traveled all over the world. I've lectured on every continent save Antarctica. And if I can find black people down there, I'm going down there too. My goal is to visit 65 countries and lecture in 40. And I've been all over the world, but there's nothing like Egypt. So always keep in mind what a special trip this is. So I'm going to take about 50 minutes and again give you a visual overview of a lot of the things that we've been talking about. I'll show you some of the temples that you'll be seeing over the next couple of days in Luxor. Luxor is my favorite part of Egypt because Luxor has, it's been estimated at least, has 85% of all the monuments of pharaonic Egypt. 85%. And the West Bank, as Sister Noah said, is the most special part of it. It's delightful. And I'm just tingling with excitement. Brother Raymond, I dedicated the lecture to you. There he is in his beautiful Nubian queen. All right, now let's get the show on the road. Let's put the pedal to the metal. Let's turn the lights down, and Brother Frank is going to operate the projector. I'll just say next or go. All right, and I wanted to begin with this. You may have to move your seats so you can see, but this is not, actually not Egyptian. Because Egypt itself didn't just originate in a vacuum. It's been said that Egypt, Herodotus said it, is the gift of the Nile. But the Nile is the gift of Africa. It begins in Central Africa and flows north. And along the banks of the Nile, great civilizations develop. Okay? And we talked about this concept of civilizations the other night. But before Egypt, before Kemet, you had a series of what we might, at least we believe, nation states. And the first one that we can identify is called the Kingdom of Ta-Seti, T-A-S-E-T-I. You've heard about Set. And some people say that the word Set is derived from another word, Sut, black, and also south. The orientation of the ancient Egyptians was always towards the south, always towards inner Africa. We must keep that in mind. And instead of civilization moving from north to south, it actually moved from south to north, just like we are this morning. And this reflects that. This is a reconstruction of a stone incense burner. You know, incense. And it was very important in ancient times. It was used as an antidote, frankincense and myrrh. As an antidote to poisons, it was used in the mummification process. It was used to commune with God. And what you have here is a stone incense burner. We have been told and pointed out how part of Nubia was flooded in order to create, I guess, a larger agricultural output for Egypt because of the growing population. And as a result of that, a lot of Nubia in the south was flooded. And when the Egyptian government realized this was going to happen, they sent out a call for archaeologists all over the world to come and excavate the temples because they knew that once it was flooded, that was it. Unless modern technology will evolve to a point where we can go down there and see what's there, that's lost forever. And you had one team from the University of Chicago, the Orion Institute. A fellow named Dr. Keith Seeley, who is dead now, and another guy that I've had a chance to interact with and talk. His name is Dr. Bruce Williams. These are European Americans. Okay? And what they did, they excavated in this area in the early 70s, Tassetti, and they were able to find at a place called Kustul, Q-U-S-T-U-L, in northern Sudan, a series of artifacts. And one of them was a stone incense burner that I have actually seen with my own eyes. And this is a diagram of it. Now, if you look here, you see certain things that you should already be familiar with. The most important of which is a figure seated on a throne with the same emblems of divinity that we have been looking at, the flail, and you can see the crown that we associate with Upper Egypt or Southern Egypt. But this was found and dated to be at least 6 generations before the first dynasty in Egypt. But this is the crown that we associate with Southern Egypt, with Upper Egypt. And so what this proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is that Egyptian civilization is actually based in Inner Africa. It didn't come from Europe, it didn't come from Asia. There's no dynastic race of white people who came here. There are no black-skinned white people called Hamites or Euro-Africans or the Mediterranean race. That's nonsense. That's wishful thinking and the last vestiges of white supremacy. And this shows it beyond a shadow of a doubt. As far as we know, this is the first monarchy. This is the first nation state in the world, and it comes from Inner Africa in northern Sudan. I wanted to end with that. Now keep your fingers crossed, and let's hope the slide projector works properly. Assembling it was about like building a pyramid, so let's see what happens. Brother Frank, go. Let's try it. All right, that's pretty good. And every now and then we may have to try to focus it a little bit. We're going to do the best we can. That's not bad. This is actually a pre-dynastic figure. You know what the dynasties are by now, right? The dynasties are the royal families. One member of the family succeeding the other for an extended period. There were 30 of these families, about 25 of which were African. There were several foreign dynasties like the Hyksos. And then you have the Ptolemaic dynasty. Okay? And this dynastic system was developed by a man named Manetho, an African, employed by the early Ptolemies to write a history of Egypt in Greek. The book itself has basically been lost, but there are fragments of it, and we can use it to construct this chronological outline. Now this figure right here is actually from the end of the pre-dynastic phase. The pre-dynastic phase stretches far back into antiquity. Antiquity just means ancient times. And his name, or he has been called Scorpion. I don't know if that was his actual name. This is a vase, perhaps a mace head, and there's a scorpion on the side by the king, by the monarch. The king is portrayed as larger than life. You can see, if you look closely, the fan bearer behind him. So the king is larger than life. He has on his back, attached to his waist, a bull's tail. Again, as Sister Noah, who is a brilliant scholar in her own right, I've learned a lot from her, and she's been just as patient and pleasant as she can be. And I know her patience has been tested big time, too. I've never seen her lose her temper. Give her one more round of applause. Let's talk about a lot of things. And she mentioned that they didn't worship animals, but they valued certain properties that they associated with what we might call zootypes. And the bull obviously represented strength and power and virility. And you see the king engaged in some kind of agricultural process. That's some kind of plow. And again, you see the crown from the south. Most of the time, in the early days at least, the southern crown, or the crown of Upper Egypt, is preeminent because the Upper Egyptian portion of the kingdom was a preeminent portion of the kingdom. Whenever there were times of trouble, whenever there were times of turmoil, it was to the south that the Egyptians looked for rejuvenation and renewal. So I wanted to begin with this because this piece represents the culmination or the end of the pre-dynastic phase and the transition into the dynastic phase of what we commonly call Egypt of the pharaohs. Frank, let's try the next one. Yes, this is the person I call Ahamena. Now, many people say that the founder of the first dynasty is a man named Narmer, and that's probably true. This may be Narmer, maybe it's his son. The Greeks use a name called Menes. But this period is so vague, and the written records are so ambiguous, that a lot of it is purely speculative. For example, most people believe, most traditional Egyptologists believe that the first dynasty began around 3200 BC. I believe, and I'm not an Egyptologist, I'm a historian who studied Egypt, and so my interpretations may be different. In fact, most Egyptologists don't always agree. Okay? So there's room for discussion, and there's nothing wrong with disagreement as long as we don't get nasty with each other. We're trying to learn, we're trying to grow, and I'm learning a lot. So I believe that this is actually the founder of the first dynasty, and I believe that the first dynasty was actually established more like about 3400 BC. Now, when I talk to traditional Egyptologists, they're talking about things like Dynasty 0, Dynasty -1, because we're constantly finding new stuff. And this is just an awesome piece. I began virtually all my presentations on Egypt. If you've seen me speak before, and I know some of you have, for example, at the orientation and other places, I usually put this one in here. This piece is actually in a museum in London at the School of African and Oriental Studies at the University of London. And it's in a special museum called the William Matthew Flinders Petrie Museum. Petrie was the first big British Egyptologist. Petrie wrote more than 1,000 pieces. And he would come over here every year and dig, and then go back to England after he cataloged the pieces, and then lecture and raise money and come back the next year. And he did it for about 50 years. Okay, so he is a big Egyptologist, and they named a museum after him. And this is there. I've been to the museum, I've seen the piece. Most of these pieces I've either photographed or at least seen, sometimes touched them. And this is a particularly nice piece, but the deceptive part about it is that it's not gray. Sometimes when you take a picture, and you know if you use a flash, it creates a grayish hue. It's brown. It's flesh tone. And you should see it from the side. It really looks like a soul brother from the side. Look at the crown that he's wearing. A lot of times you see black folk right in Harlem and South Central with that same crown. We were taken from Africa, but we took Africa with us, and it manifests itself in various ways. Look at that big old nose. He managed to keep his, thank God. Full lips. Look at them big old ears. And something else that we commonly associate with Egyptian art, those kind of almond-shaped eyes, that epicanthic fold that we normally associate with East Asia. So this is the first king, I contend, of the first dynasty. Again, I believe it's about 3400 BC, and this is a beautiful piece. This photograph actually comes from a book by the late great Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop called The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. Next. And I appreciate you, Frank. Now, this is a nice one too, and I'm not even sure who this woman was. This takes us to the second dynasty. And this probably begins, I would say, about, I don't know, we're just speculating, maybe 3100 BC. And what's important here is that you see a black woman. Look at that hair. I hope you got a chance to see those hair pieces in the Cairo Museum. That's worth a trip over here by itself. If you didn't, we're going to be back in Cairo for a couple of days. I believe there'll be some free time. Maybe you get a chance to go back there. Look at the hair, and you see a black woman seated on the throne where she belongs, right? The line of descent is traced through the female side of the family. You have the matrifocal social structure. So I would contend the emphasis was on the female. Wasn't no such thing as the B word in ancient Egypt. We don't have a record of domestic violence in ancient Egypt, nor do we have a record of child abuse. Convalescent homes. I don't even know, and I guess I'll have to ask my sister Noah about this, about prisons in ancient Egypt. You had a highly evolved moral society, and women were at the basis of that. And also you see the beautiful writing system that we are now calling the Medu Neter, which means divine speech, commonly called hieroglyphics. They are to invent three writing systems here. One, hieroglyphics. That's what the Greeks call it. And the next one, hieratic, which is, I guess, a simplified version of hieroglyphics. And finally, a writing system used in business transactions beginning in the 25th dynasty called Demotic. But anyway, those are some beautiful glyphs right there. Next. And let's pick up the pace some, because I could be here till we get ready to get on the plane. This is the last pharaoh of the second dynasty. His name is King Kasekimai. And he is a very powerful figure. Reminds me of Jamal. Stood about 7 feet tall. Was on the throne for 28 years.
I like that.
I know you do, man. That's why I said. Look at the crown from the south. See, when you're tight with somebody, you can joke with them. You know, we have that kind of relationship. Jamal and I have been tight for about 10 years now, and when you travel with people, you get even closer. And I think that people on this trip will develop relationships that will last for a lifetime, and that's special. Now, he lost his nose. We talked about that. No need to go into that again. But this is a fine piece of work. He may have had, I don't know, a crook and a flail in his hands. His arms are broken. But he is also, according to some scholars, like a man named Dr. David O'Connor from the University of Pennsylvania, the first person in the world to commission a navy. A few years ago, there is a fleet of ships, 12 to 18 ships found about 280 miles south of Cairo, near a city called Abydos. And they were designed apparently during his reign. He is a great administrator, and during these two dynasties, Dynasties 1 and Dynasty 2, they more or less formalized the Egyptian state. They got it all together, the forms of government. Next. This is Zoser. Zoser is the preeminent monarch of the third dynasty, and as you know, the third dynasty begins what is commonly called the Pyramid Age, or the Old Kingdom. It is, in a sense, the first, what should we call it, golden age in world history. Probably takes us to about 2900 BC. Again, these are rough dates, and most of them are my chronologies. Now, this is in the Cairo Museum. And when I take a tour in the Cairo Museum, which is not easy, because if you're in there talking to a handful of folk, the security guards are going to go, "Where's your guide? Where's your guide?" And then I want to throw him in the Nile. And then you can't do that, because you'd be in jail. So you have to be cool. But when I've had a chance to take people through the museum, I like to start with Narmer's palette in this. Now, this is a beautiful brown flesh-toned piece with big, thick braids in the back. But the piece that I see in the museum now doesn't look like that. It's as though there's some kind of chemical process. It looks real white and chalky now. Anyway, this is the preeminent pharaoh or monarch of the third dynasty. Next. And he is important, but far more important is the man who worked under him. This is the great Imhotep. Now, Dr. Hassan says something real profound about him when we were in the museum. He is a multi-genius. He is a scholar par excellence. He's a physician. He's the prime minister or the grand vizier of the country. He ran the country. The Greeks were later to identify him with their own god of medicine. He is later deified. They would ask the question, could there be another like Imhotep? He designed the step pyramid, which I'll show you in a moment, but Dr. Hassan says something, that he was also a scribe. And later generations of Egyptian scribes, before they would write, they would drop a few ink. They would spill a few drops of ink in honor of Imhotep. I like that. That struck me. Okay? That his memory was that distinct. What would they say, brothers and sisters, about you and me in future generations? They had a sense of mission and purpose in life. And we talk about them as though they're with us in the room tonight. This morning. This is Imhotep. Next. And this is what he designed. This is at a place called Saqqara. This is what you're going to see. This, to me, is even more impressive than Khufu's pyramid, because when I stand in front of the Great Pyramid, or Khufu on the horizon, it is called, it's so big, it's so humongous, it's like you doubt your sanity. You say, I must be dreaming. That can't be real. But this is realizable to me. This is called the step pyramid. Now, up to this point, the Egyptians or the pharaohs, when they had a tomb, they would call it, in the Arabic expression, a mastaba, like in the form of a bench, a rectangular shaped tomb. But Imhotep had the genius to go beyond that. And he built a series of mastabas, I guess you might say one on top of the other, of Tura limestone. It's about 200 feet high. To me, it's like a jewel in the sand. And if you have time, you can take a camel or a donkey or a horse or walk through this soft powdery sand and walk to the other side and peer, and you can see where the tomb chamber actually was. This is the first pyramid, but it's not only the first pyramid, it is the first large stone building in the world. And it's designed by your ancestors. Next. This is another one, and I'm determined to try to see this one if I can on this trip. And this is a pyramid built towards the end of the third dynasty. And I believe that this is at a place called Maidum. I think it's sometimes called the Harara Pyramid. And I'm just using this to show how the pyramid shape evolved. And sometimes this is called a truncated pyramid. I've been to an oasis called the Fayoum, and you can see it in the distance. But if I can, I'm going to try to sneak away and see this one on this trip. Next. And this is Khufu, better known to us by the Greek name Cheops. I use the African names as much as possible, but sometimes we're stuck with other names because we're familiar with them. And this is just a little bitty statue about 4 inches high made of pink quartz. And it's in the Cairo Museum, and you rarely get a chance to see it. Next. This is called the, I think we got it's out of order, but this is okay. This is from the 4th dynasty too, and this is sometimes called the solar boat or the pyramid ship. This is perhaps the world's oldest preserved ship. It's I think either 120 or 140 feet long. It's made of cedar wood. It was not nailed together. It was sewn together with rope, put together and then taken apart with instructions left as to how to put it back together again. It was found outside the Great Pyramid. Apparently our ancestors believed that you would need the same things in death that you needed in life. And because of the Nile River, because boats were so important, you would need one in the next life. And this is really a marvel to see. It has been called a masterpiece of watercraft that could sail on the Nile today if you put it on the river. Next. There we go. This is the Giza Plateau. Jamal and I went the first night. Y'all were sleeping. We out and falling asleep in the taxi. Okay? But we went anyway. Couldn't get in there. All you can do is see it on the horizon. But it's impressive. You've not seen Egypt until you've seen these monuments. These were not built by slaves. They were built by free African people during the 4th dynastic period, beginning, I suppose, about 2600 BC. There are a bunch of pyramids in Egypt, close to 100, I believe. I've been in quite a few and intend to go into some more. But these are the 3 most famous ones. Everybody has seen these. I suspect some of you came here just for that. These pyramids were believed to have been built over a period of 70 years by 3 generations of African kings. Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure. Their names are Khufu on the horizon. That's the big one. And then the next one is called, Great is Khafre, and the other one is called Divine is Menkaure. Now, we are in the 4th dynasty, and by this time, Egypt is already old. In fact, when we have Narmer and Mena, and Aha, they probably didn't see themselves as starting something new. They probably saw themselves as the culmination of a long historical process. So these are, it's almost too much for work. And pictures don't do them justice.
Right.
It's not till you stand there and gaze upon them, until you can get the appreciation for what the European translator of the Rosetta Stone said, the Egyptians built like men 100 feet tall. The one in the background is the biggest one. It's 484 feet high. That means it's 48 stories. It takes up 13 acres. Jamal claims he climbed all the way to the top, but I really wonder about that, man.
Twice.
Because I got up about 1/10 of the way, and I said, man, I'm going down, okay? But it's impressive. And they're made of granite, and they built to last for all time. It's been estimated that the one in the background, I don't know how these estimates have been arrived at, actually is composed of 2.5 million granite blocks, the average weight of which is 5,000 pounds. And they were finished, they were covered with limestone and polished. And it said you can see them glittering like mirrors for hundreds of miles. This is what your ancestors did. Slaves did not do that. They didn't build these with mud brick. This is the real deal. Next. And there's the Great Pyramid, and there is what is commonly called the Great Sphinx, or Horamakhet, Heru on the horizon. It is probably the most well-known portrait statue in the world. Again, it has the body of the lion and the head of the king, a king named Khafre, who was the 2nd Great Pyramid builder. Next. And there is a close-up. You can see how it's been badly damaged, but it still looks like an African to me. And let me show you an image of the king who had it designed in the 4th dynasty in his own likeness. Next. Look at the resemblance. That's a Khafre. Look at those little curls. And that pharaonic beard. Next. And there's the same king. Some of you may be familiar with a book called The Stolen Legacy, written by George D.M. James. This was used on the cover for a long time. And this is King Khafre. Isn't that nice? Not only am I showing you African images, but some of these are just quite simply beautiful pieces of art that go beyond race and ethnicity. Next. This is Menkare in the middle. I wish I looked like that. Mean and tough, I'm busy on the computer all the time. I have to do a little more than that. And there were supposedly 42 of these, one representing each administrative province or district or nome, and he's surrounded by Heteru or Hathor and a local nome goddess. Menkare is the third of the three great pyramid builders. And his tomb chamber is much larger. I would imagine the tomb chamber is about the size of this room. It's very big. Next. Are y'all with me?
Yes.
This is a queen from the 4th dynasty. This is in the Boston Museum. This was taken by a team from Harvard University. And the Boston Museum of Fine Arts has a lot of these pieces. The team was led by a fellow named George Andrew Reisner, a racist European American who was a teacher of the great African Center scholar William Leo Hansberry. And this gives you an idea as to what black women in the royal family looked like during the 4th dynasty. Next. This is my man from the 5th dynasty. The 5th dynasty, they don't build the massive pyramids. They build pyramids, but they're not as big and they're not as precise. But they have what's called sun temples. And they also, this man sends an expedition to the part of Africa called the land of Punt for frankincense and myrrh. The land of Punt was considered the land of God. And this is the first man to do it. Look how Africoid he looks. We shouldn't have to be having this discussion, because Egypt is in Africa. But we must prove to the world, and mostly to our own people, that it's African. Once you are convinced that it's African, you will demand that the rest of the world accept it as such. See, we can take our destiny in our own hand. Our brothers and sisters, I believe we can do anything we choose to do. Nobody can stop. You can blame other people for your victimization, but you have to look to yourself for your liberation. Nobody's going to save you. Nobody's going to write your history but you. You have to do it. And if you cannot achieve your own liberation, perhaps you don't deserve it. And I know better than that. We are a great and mighty people, and we must act that way. Next. This is a good one. This is from the 6th dynasty. Now we're just going through the dynasties right quick. And wherever I stop is where we'll finish this evening. Because I'm not going to wear you out. I want you to have time to get ready for Esna. I've not been there myself. It'll be a new experience. This is a queen from the 6th dynasty. This is made of alabaster. This is in the Brooklyn Museum. I spent a lot of time in Brooklyn. And they have a lot of nice museums in New York. And this is one of the nicest ones right here. Look at the black queen, made of alabaster, but look at the little boy on her lap. This child became the king of Egypt when he was 10 years old. He died on the throne at the tender age of 104. He reigned 94 years. What does that tell you about the concept of medical science? 94 years, that's the longest recorded reign in world history. Next. And speaking of medical science, take a good look here. They're performing circumcisions. This is from the Old Kingdom. And the guys who are being carved on have a smile on their face. I got circumcised when I was 6. I'm still hurting. Right now. They smiling. Next. And this is from the first intermediate period. This is actually at a place it's hard to get to. It's at a place called Bani Hassan. And this is more in what we might call Middle Egypt. I hope to go there one day. Kwesi was telling me about this the other day. But if you look at this, you see a couple things. First of all, if it's really sharp and it's really dark, it looks like a kind of early or primitive form of animation. But in addition to that, you see men in kind of martial arts or wrestling postures. And perhaps this is appropriate because, or reflective of the time that we are talking about. An intermediate period is a downtime. This is a period of an influx of foreigners, not foreign invasions, but foreign migrations. And in addition to that, there are no great buildings, the quarries are silent, and there's a kind of anarchy in the land, and perhaps this reflects it. Next. And this is another great pharaoh. His name is Nepepidrab Mentuhotep II. I trust you got to see him in the museum. He's portrayed in the color black. Now, these colors do not reflect ethnicity. We know the ancient Egyptians were black. They are symbolic. And what does the color black mean symbolically? Well, according to art historians at the University of Chicago, the first big American Egyptological institution. The color black symbolized the color of divinity. The color black was the color of God. Here is the color of God, my brother. Thank you for correcting me. Now, here you have the crown from the north, the red crown. The crown from Upper Egypt is the white crown, and he's in the Osirian posture. Next. Nefertari-Mentuhotep II is important because he unified Egypt for the second time. His family comes from the south, where we're going right now, what's called the Scepter Nome, the city of Waset or Luxor. They came from the south, dispelled the anarchy, reunited the two lands, and you have another era of strength, health, and prosperity called the Middle Kingdom. And he's in the 11th dynasty. This is one of his wives. He had several wives, all of which are very prominent, and they are also always portrayed in the color black. Next. This piece has personal significance for me. This is a king from the 12th dynasty. The 12th dynasty is called the Classical Age in Literature and Art. And this is in the Luxor Museum. I hope we can make arrangements for me to give you a tour of the Luxor Museum. I hope we have some time and we can hook that up. Because this is a museum that's well lit. The artifacts are nicely spaced out. It's usually not that crowded. It's just nice. I love it. The first time I came to Egypt was about 10 years ago. And I remember I felt like a stranger in a strange land. I looked around at the people, didn't see hardly anybody looking like me. These European tourists made me very uncomfortable. And finally, after I had been here for about a week, I felt comfortable enough to go out on my own. And I had been hearing about this museum and I wanted to go there. So I went to the museum by myself and I walked around, and finally I found this piece and I sat in front of it and the tears just began to flow. It was as though he said, Runoko, it's okay. You're at home. You're in the land of the blacks. And I'll never forget that experience. Just a sense of peace and serenity and tranquility came over me. If you can, at some point, go off by yourself where it's safe. And when you get away from the madness of the rush and the vendors and people pestering you, it's as though you can hear the ancients talking to you. And it's, for me, a very personal and spiritual experience. This is Senusret I. He is a mighty man of the 12th dynasty. And he's got the two ankhs in his hand. He's in the Osirian posture. Look at that beautiful brown flesh. Next. And this is also in the Luxor Museum. This is Senusret III. The Greeks call him Sesostris. He is a warrior king. Tradition says he conquered deep into Africa and all the way to the Caucasus Mountains. And he left a military garrison, black soldiers whose descendants are there today to maintain the areas that they had conquered. He is a warrior king for sure. And he has the double crown. You see the uraeus and the pharaonic beard. That's in the Luxor Museum. Go and see it if you can. Next. There he is. That's my #1 pharaoh. His name is Nahmare-Amenemhet III. He comes to us from the height of the 12th dynasty. He reigns for 48 years. His daughter becomes a pharaoh. His daughter's name is Sebek-Neferu. At least that's my argument. She certainly is at least the queen regent. He is responsible for the largest building, perhaps in ancient times. It was called the Egyptian Labyrinth by the Greeks. That's what I was talking about when I said you had the building that had 3,000 rooms, 1,500 below the ground, 1,500 above the ground. People who saw it estimated that the ceiling of each room above the ground was composed of a single slab of granite that they estimated to weigh 30 tons. Herodotus saw the building. Herodotus said, I have seen this building with my own eyes, and yet it is impossible for me to describe. He said that this one monument must have cost more in labor and money than all of the walls and public works of the Greeks put together. One building. And now there's not a single stone standing. It was dismantled in ancient times. And this is, look at that hairstyle. That's not Bob Marley up there. That's the pharaoh. But you didn't see that in the museum, did you? You see, when you go to the Cairo Museum, you're going to see King Tut, you're going to see Akhenaten Nefertiti, you're going to see Ramses. But most of the history before that, you rarely even get a glimpse at. And then before you know it, you're rushing out. The Cairo Museum has so much, you could almost plan a tour to Egypt just around the museum. And this is from the 12th dynasty. That's a powerful African there, and that's my #1 pharaoh. I have a list of them. Next. This is his daughter. This is Sebek-Neferu. She's beautiful even without her nose. This is also in the Brooklyn Museum, and this is a close-up shot that I was able to get. That's a nice piece too. So this takes us to the end of the 12th dynasty. Now following the 12th dynasty is another intermediate period, dynasties 13, 14, 15, 16, and part of dynasty 17. Next. This is a rare photograph of a pharaoh from the 13th dynasty. His name is King Kinjur. And this is an extremely rare piece. Next. And here we begin to close down for the day, for the morning session. This is Amos I and his wife and queen, Amos Nefertari. For what good is a king without a queen? Seated on the throne, they are considered liberators. Egypt has been invaded by a group called the Hyksos, the rulers of foreign lands, the shepherd kings. And they come and expel them from the country. They culminate a struggle that began with ancestors like Second and Ra Tau, Kamos, Queen Tetisheri. The 18th dynasty is what they found. And they are considered great national heroes by the ancient Egyptians. This is done about 1560 BC. Now we're on pretty firm ground when it comes to the chronology and the dates. People have commented about how brilliant the colors are in some of the temples, but look at that. You know that the word Kemet is the basis of the word chemistry, and obviously they knew the chemical composition of paint. If you paint your house today, all likelihood 10 years now, your neighbors are going to be complaining you need to paint it again. You're degrading the neighborhood. That's 3,560 years old, and it looks as good today as it did yesterday. When you want to see how far we've fallen as a people, brothers and sisters, look at ancient Egypt. When you want to see the heights that we can achieve, brothers and sisters, look at ancient Egypt. And this is why everybody wants to claim it. Everybody wants to say this is a part of their heritage, but it's ours. We just don't realize it. And when we realize what we've done, we'll realize what we can do. Does that make sense? Yeah. Hello? Yeah. Let's go to the next one. There she is by herself, making a fashion statement. This is in the London Museum, the British Museum. This black queen. A set of prayers were written for this black woman that were in effect for 600 years after her death. She is considered one of the most beloved figures in ancient times, and yet we don't know her name. All of us are talking about Cleopatra, a relatively insignificant Greek woman. We're talking about Nefertiti, whose origins are very vague. But the more powerful African people whose reign is indisputable, where we don't have to look and wonder and speculate and conjecture, we don't even know their names because we're not writing our history. The piece itself is beautiful. Look at this beautiful black woman with the ankh in her hand, the key of life. Next. Amos Nefertari. Amos Nefertari. This is the first time I believe we hear the name Nefertari. And you hear variations of it. Neferu, Amos Nefertari, Nefertari, the wife of Ramses II. And the name means something to the effect of the beautiful one, or the beautiful one has arrived, or something to that effect. I hope you do get a chance to go to the Valley of the Queens, and you'll get a chance if you go there. The tomb that you must see is Nefertari's tomb. But I assure you that the largest tomb in the Valley of the Queens is smaller than the smallest tomb in the Valley of the Kings. But out of respect to the sisters, I think it's very important that we go there and at least see it. Now, this woman is important, and after her husband dies, after reigning 25 years, I believe that she becomes a co-regent with her son. We've seen the symbols of rulership and divinity, the crook and the flail. And here she is, the old queen, with her son, whose head has been knocked off and sold, you know, to an art dealer, by the way. His name is Amenhotep I. And you can see her with the flail and him with the crook. This would seem to imply a kind of a co-rulership, a co-regency. Next, I'm almost done for today. And this takes us to Maka-Re Hatshepsut, who has been called, rightly or wrongly, the first great woman in history. You will go to her mortuary temple, you will be amazed. You will be impressed. Hatshepsut's father, her daddy, is a man named Thutmose I, a military man. Her husband is a man, and this is even speculative, the relationships here. Her husband is Thutmose II. Thutmose II is a sickly ruler. He dies at a young age, and she assumes the rulership. She is a woman who ushers in an age of great prosperity. She comes to us about 1500 BC, and she's on the throne for about 20 years. You can see she even has the fake beard on. Some of the obelisks that we saw belong to her. She sent an expedition to that fabulous land of Punt that I talked about. Let me show you the man in her life, her major love interest. Next. And there he is. His name is Sinmut. He's the overseer of works. He is her architect. He is her advisor. And here he is holding Hatshepsut's daughter, Neferah. And this is a beautiful piece. Sometimes we get this rap that black men don't make good fathers, that we're not tender. Look at that. Nothing's going to happen to that child while he's holding her. And he doesn't look embarrassed. He looks like a real man to me. His manhood is not in doubt. He loved Hatshepsut big time. And he wanted the world to know. Brother Raymond. Let's go to the next slide. And that's the temple he designed for her. That's Hatshepsut's mortuary, with the belief that to speak the names of one's ancestors is to make them live again. You will visit this on the west bank of the Nile. It will be one of the highlights of the trip. On one side is the Valley of the Queens, and on the other side is the Valley of the Kings. And her mortuary temple, carved out of the cliffs of Thebes, is there for the world to see. They built to last for all time, and they built with the concept of perfection in mind. That's what I call noontime love. Not 3 o'clock in the morning sneaking out of windows love. Don't want anybody to know. He wanted the world to know. I'm impressed with that. And this is the Nile River. In antiquity, I assume you could just sail up and down the Nile, get off, and go to the temple. And you're going to love it. The next slide is the last slide for this morning's session. And this is her nephew, Thutmose III, a mighty man, a warrior king par excellence. He is on the throne for 54 years, Thutmose III. The name Thutmose, you've heard the last part of it. You can't eliminate this concept of Moses whether you want to or not. It's rooted, at least there is some basis for it in the linguistic analysis. He is on the throne for, I believe, 54 years. He is a warrior king. He leads 17 separate military campaigns in person. He is never defeated in battle. His exploits are celebrated even today. Tradition says he conquered 105 nations. He led 17 military campaigns. He retired 17-0. And yet Napoleon is called, he is called the Napoleon of antiquity. It shows how backward history is. Because if anything, Napoleon should be regarded as the Thutmose of modern times. He's got the double crown. He's got the uraeus. His tomb is one of the early tombs in the Valley of the Kings. It's high up top. Don't go up there if you're not ready to do some serious climbing. And this piece is from the British Museum. So brothers and sisters, I tried to continue where I left off the other night. The other night I wasn't able to do a slide presentation. This is the first part. I'll continue and complete the overview of the dynasties tonight. And in the meantime, I leave you for a little while. May you have blessings without number and fly on the wings of my eye forever. Thank you very much.